meta breakdown. The patch was released last night. It's active right now. And obviously World Championships is going on. So that's going to be a big part. We're actually going to lead off with that. If you want to jump ahead, I'll make sure to put a chapter in the video timeline. You'll be able to jump ahead to the 1321 changes. 1320 has been largely well received from players that are competing in it. It seems like it has slowed the game down, a lot of good things. But we'll get to that next and help you guys get an insight into what is available to you to play in the patch. But for Worlds, this is a breakdown from lolfandom.com. It's keeping track of all the champions that have been played. And there's a couple of things that are staggering. We're also going to compare it to our old meta analysis. And we're going to make some updates based on what our predictions were and what we can actually expect moving forward. So first off, we're going to go over all of the elements here. Tried to make the screen big enough so you guys can see. Let me scroll down a bit. The first one that jumps out is that the #1 picked champion is also by far the highest win rate champion. So this completely warps draft. I want to talk about the Xayah advantage and why she's got such a high win rate. Xayah, so Rakan is playable, okay? That's key #1, and Xayah is good. That's key #2. So when you pick Xayah, specifically blue 1, you force enemy team to take Rakan. And when they're taking Rakan, then they're going to take another piece of either a mid or jungle, let's say Jarvan or Orianna, for example, and then they tend to grab Rakan on red 3 to, then they take their AD carry on red 3 because they have to, and that tends to be Kai'Sa. The thing is, Xayah is that much stronger than Kai'Sa, and the fact that you're forcing them to take Rakan in red 2 in a position where they should normally have the advantage of knowing what your support's going to be and maybe getting a counter pick. The thing is that Xayah and Rakan together are so good that you need to break it up. And that's completely changing the scope of the drafts. Okay. Now, some of the other champions, the ban rate right here on Maokai is exceptionally high. Orianna as well, 40 games to hit the ban. We can actually sort this by most games banned. We see Rumble's also there. So Rumble, we expected to be the #1 top laner by a mile. He's also in that boat of an extravagantly high win rate. Some teams are letting it through the draft. This has to change. Going into week 2, now that we're all in elimination series from here on out, everyone should have this report on Rumble. They should have some games against it if they're planning to play against it. But frankly, just get it off the game. Unless, now we're talking about the different draft strategies. You can leave Xayah and Rumble open and say, I'll let you get Xayah. I'll even let you get Xayah Rakan if we can create some sort of counter pick matchup for it. Maybe it becomes like a Caitlyn Karma where you just suffocate them. Maybe it becomes a Bard Ezreal where you say, okay, you can have that thing, but Bard's going to go roam. Ezreal's going to hold down the fort and will win in other lanes with some other shapes. But you have to do that in your draft prep, right? And you have to go through all the permutations, which bans might come out and how that could change everything. Nico is another champion with 31 bans, Poppy way up there as well. And you see these champions, most of them that have high ban rates have good win rates until we get to Lee Sin. And I think this is interesting, and I want to talk about specifically how we've seen Lee Sin played. Lee Sin should be counter to their jungle and helping to get your double AP lanes ahead. And very specifically, you want something like Rumble up in the top lane, Syndra in the mid lane would be nice. The problem is we've seen a lot of very passive Syndra play, just fishing for QEs. And that means that Lee Sin is basically gated to 1 kill during lane phase while their flash is down in the Syndra lane. And that's it. And whether or not you can snowball from there. And if you can snowball it, great, right? We just saw it from Canyon. So that is absolutely how you have to look to play this champion. And so far, just picking it with Syndra as if it's a prio thing to do, I think is the wrong way to approach it. I think he is strong enough, he is playable, but it can't just be in this very passive, hey, let's look for one fishy thing to do. You really have to have a goal for the entire game. Going into the winningest strategies, right? We have Xayah and Rakan up here. The sheer amount of picks is going to create some of this flow as well. Obviously, win rate might be a better thing to look at. Some of the undefeated picks. Darius, this probably won't happen again because this was largely in the top lane. But honestly, Jungle Darius is available and it is good. It clears the jungle in about 305 and it wins into dive comps. And so much of what we've seen in this tournament has been Rel, Maokai, Orianna synergy, like people diving in. And yeah, Darius doesn't want to get caught up in all that necessarily, but he's the perfect type of champion to play into dive. So there is a world where Darius could still come back. All these other champions only got picked once. We have Tom Kench very high on our list because he's so good with Senna, and that is the lane that won. Tarek is also very high, and he's good in 2 different roles. Tarek is also one of those good champions that's very good in a you come to me sort of style, although people tend to pair him with something like Sivir and Maokai so that you can go forward and look for an engage, but we haven't seen that much of him. The big surprise to me has been Wukong. Okay, Wukong 5-1. The only loss was in the game where we did have a Lee Sin, and Lee Sin just counterpicked, counter jungled, stayed in their face all day long, got double kill early, and the Wukong was suffocated out of the game. I think Wukong is being played where Lee Sin could be played in drafts, where you're saying, all right, the pool is lower, it's pinched, I want to be aggressive, I want to fight you for your early jungle, and then have some amount of synergy. But Wukong has much easier to execute plays than Lee Sin, which is why I think it's having such a high win rate. But it is a small sample size. We could see that change. Xayah is the big, outstander. We thought Rumble would be here. And 12 games, it's still in the realm where you could still be 9-5, or this could be 8-4, or even 7-5, and you're still thinking like, okay, it's doing okay. But 9-3, it's definitely carrying games, and we haven't even seen Rumble ults do everything they do. But Xayah being the big outstander. Now, Kennen we expected to be here as well. Renata as well. These are counterpick champions. Disengage, and especially when you're playing with Draven. So when Draven is a good counterpick, Renata is a good pick, and that's having a lot of success. Kennen specifically should be taken into Renekton, and Renekton should be pretty high levels across the board, especially if Jax and Cassante are popular. Then we expect to see a lot of Renekton, and if Renekton's a good blind pick, then Kennen's a great counterpick. Nico doing better than expected. Viego's being paired with Syndra as well, but I like that this is with a carry. If you're going to play the supportive fish for a QE style, then I think it needs to be with Viego, not with Lee Sin. Gnar mostly counterpicks. LeBlanc is a champion that we think is just good, and we're going to see later that she actually got buffed again, making her, in my opinion, one of the best champions in the game. I know the game has moved away from snowballing, and that might be why she's going to have a tougher time going forward, but if they make her strong enough, she's absolutely going to be good. Draven only picked 3 times, kind of surprising. Jax with a good pick rate. This champion's just proving to be great. I imagine that we're going to start seeing Renekton near the bottom of this. Go to win rate on the opposite side. Let's see which champions have the most games played. 0-3 on Gwen, just not strong enough. What we mentioned about this champion is you had to have a pinched top and jungle pool and the desire to flex. And if you could flex and preferably have them try to pick, let's say you're picking in red 4, you pick Gwen, and then they pick what they think is going to be a counter pick in the top lane, and then you move her to the jungle where she's actually going to be just fine farming against whoever it's going to be, Maokai, for example, and happy to fight against him later. And then you can get a counter pick for yourself in top, but it's just very difficult to create that sort of situation. No team has really even tried. They've picked Gwen early enough when they think it's just going to be a straight up counter, but she's just not as strong as she once was. Sivir 0-3 is a little bit surprising. Sivir is fine into Caitlyn and Tristana especially, but we haven't seen much Caitlyn and Tristana. Sivir's notoriously bad against Xayah though, because blocking one of the feathers often doesn't mean that another feather's not hitting you anyways, and so all it takes is 3 feathers to hit you for you to get rooted, even when you do have the spell shield up, which is why it doesn't do that much. Malphite 0-2, there was one game that was completely baffling why they picked it, but the other one, again, low sample size. Champion has pretty low impact, especially in pro when everyone's holding onto their resources for that team fight. One Malphite ultimate happens, it gets answered by 3 flashes, and they basically blank the champion that way. But going into the more popular picks, this is crazy. 2-13 from Talia. This has to be because teams are not finding the Weaver's Wall angles. You basically have to find the right angles to want to play this champion. Otherwise, it's not strong enough. It is fine in a range matchup versus Orianna or Azir, but those champions have way more play. It's easier to make their plays, whereas Talia needs to be proactive. And I think that the fact that the game changed in June is the biggest reason for this. The fact that minions arrive at the same time makes it harder for people to push mid and then go for a dive bottom, which used to be one of Talia's big strengths. I still think it's there. You just need the help of the jungler, and you need to have a team-wide rotation that can make this happen. So far, they haven't been able to do it. Also, we've seen people's accuracy at dismounting Talia, near perfection at ripping her off the surfing the rocks. So Talia, I think, just has to get dropped down. It's just not performing well, and to an extent that's this great, or you have to make a major adaptation to how you want to play it. Ahri, similar thing. We had Ahri in D tier. It's too far gone from when it was strong. Also, some of the players playing this were players A, from minor regions, but B, Ahri aficionados from minor regions, right? So they're going to have a knack for playing this champion anyways, but it's just not strong enough coming into the environment. Blitzcrank had one game where it was crazy on fire, and I think that has motivated a lot of people to play it, but it's not that good. Leona has been getting picked into Rakan, and specifically into Xayah Rakan. When you allow them to get Xayah Rakan, you're like, all right, we've got the Leona counter pick, but Xayah's too strong. Especially Xayah into another melee, one who can ult for ult, trade, and win against Leona is always going to be strong. And Aatrox we expected to be down here, just picked because people like it, they want the carry potential, but just not nearly strong enough compared to the other champions who are meta in the lane. Sante, Jax, Renekton, all going to have a fantastic time against it, and that's not even talking about counter picks like Fiora or Kled that could make it in. Aphelios we expected to be 0 presence. Again, this is for teams that just want to have that scaling and they're used to having this champion. I think Zeri fills this role much better if you want to be the team fight scaling AD carry, but Xayah is just better in all cases anyways. Olaf is just one player. Vi, again, being synergized with like Azir and Orianna and Syndra. Less so with Syndra, since Syndra can set up other junglers. Doesn't need to be Vi, but Vi just doesn't have the same stats that she had last year. Jarvan having a hugely high prio and not really paying off is kind of interesting. It's also interesting that when you're playing Jarvan, the best pairing is probably Azir, because they benefit the most from the attack speed. And we've seen Azir just hasn't shown up yet because it's not in the extremities. It's just doing fine. And Kai'Sa 18 and 25, 41% is actually fairly low. I actually credit this. A large portion of the games that she was played were complete misbuilds. So if we take out the complete misbuilds, which was like 9 games, then she actually has a winning record, 18 and 16. So take that for what it's worth. But that's a snapshot. What's going on at Worlds? Let me just give you a peek of Alistar, who is our #1 champion. This was our rundown, or what we thought the meta would look like. So this is what we anticipated the meta to look like. Talia being strong and being an answer, plus having lots of knockbacks. But the fact that Poppy hasn't been available takes away Talia, right? If you take Talia, you're basically really trying to get Poppy, maybe even Gnar on your team. Synergies to go with the wall. But so far, teams haven't been able to do it, and Poppy's been living on the banned list. So we have to take Talia down, all right? Talia's got to go down here. Now, Ashe is a champion that we didn't see there. I still think it is the best champion, and it is undefeated, although it's just in 1 game. But it was a game where they came from behind. They could have even done more with it. Xayah very apparently needs to be up here. Ashe will... I'm not going to bump down. Well, philosophically, I can only have 1 S tier champion, so we're going to have to do this. We're going to bump Orianna up. We knew that the size of her buffs were tremendous. I think this is where we still want to live with these champions. Poppy maybe even ahead of Ivern. Ivern, despite being the strongest champion, may not get played because it is so difficult to get your team to understand what's going on, because it's such a different champion. I think that's the only reason why it's not getting played, making it that difficult. Rest of the list here I think we're okay with. Kennen normally should be in the counter pick, so I should really just put him in the counter pick tier here. Azir is someone that people are comfortable with. We could move them up, but normally the reason we put them in C tier is because you'd always rather have Orianna, and then if they're playing Orianna, you're happy to play Azir. So I think that's why we'll keep it in the C tier. A champion that we haven't seen that can fight and particularly can do well against the top 80 carries that are left on the list is Vayne. I think Vayne with a Trinity Force build can actually be quite good. Also, Runon's Hurricane is totally fine with the champion now. So we'll see whether or not it comes out. We did see a counterpick Senna Kench used in a pinched pool, and it did work well. Happy to see that. Now, from these champions, I'm happy keeping all of them here. I'm going to put Wukong into C tier because it's working as a counterpick to farm style junglers or people that you want to get ahead, or just synergy with Nico, for example. You're just like a couple decoys, a couple clones, make it a little bit harder to play. Wukong's actually performing just fine. Maokai, people seem to be very happy with playing as well. I expected Maokai to not get played because the stats are low enough. Now, this is before 1320 changes, so he's still basically one-shotting the Raptors. The problem is that anytime you pick Maokai, like, you have to ban Sylas if you want Maokai, and that telegraphs what you're doing as well. And if enemy team would just take Sylas, who is fine into these meta mid laners, right? You're fine playing it into Akali, who could be answers to the control mages. You have Azir, Orianna, Syndra. You're okay. Syndra, obviously a bad situation for Sylas. You don't want that, but still, Syndra I think is just weaker than Sylas. So you have to be very careful about the existence of Maokai versus this. But we clearly have to move Maokai back up because the prio is super high. People are playing for it. We need to keep it up there. I'm comfortable keeping Jace, these champions down here, Ahri as well. Cassante had a lot of bug fixes, and we weren't sure whether or not those would play into his strengths, and they have. The pros are clearly comfortable playing this champion. They're comfortable blind picking it, which means that we have to put it in A tier. I'll still put it at the bottom of A. I do think that the other champions are stronger, specifically Jax, Renekton are going to be okay into it, and that's why these are better blind picks. And you have Rumble. Although when you have Cassante, it does allow your team to play out very nicely front to back. But this is where we're going to update. We're going to keep these champions here. Even though we haven't seen much Ashe or Ivern, I expect them to be great. We saw support Lissandra, which is not where we want this champion played. We want it combined with engagers from the top lane, something like Ornn. So if you get that Xayah Rakan and you're looking at the second stage of the draft and you can pick up Lissandra Ornn for yourself, you'd be super, super happy. But this is our rundown. That's what we think. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, whether or not there's other champions. I guess we should take a quick peek, see if there's anything here that we haven't listed. I think most of these champions have not been picked at all. We've had a couple of these. This is pre-super nerf or super buff on Jinx, so we're not concerned about her. Garen was a, we knew that Adam would come in and Adam would do good things, especially into Cassante's. And we almost put him in the counterpick matchup because he is that good into that champion. But we're still going to keep him here, especially that Adam is gone. I expect him not to show up. And I don't think any of these champions, Renata should be in the counterpick category. I'll put her right next to Draven because those get paired together a lot. Other champions, I don't expect to see any of these. Oh, we did get Zeri. You know what? Zeri, we're still going to, I guess we have to put it in D tier. No, it's got to be here because it's rounding out a composition very specifically. If you want a hyper carry from the bot lane, I'd prefer take this champion over Aphelios. Means actually we have to put Aphelios definitively below, and we'll have to put Zeri up here, I guess. D tier, you don't really want to look at it, but if you do, and if it fits your composition, you could do it. We haven't seen much Braum. Braum has interesting effects against Xayah where you can deny the feathers or deny the drawback. Let's see if Braum makes it in. What other adaptations could come up? I expect to see more Sylas, especially as we see Maokai's. I think as the priority on Xayah changes, basically she's probably going to be perma-banned from this point on because she's just too good to pick from blue 1. It forces the hand of your opponent too much. Unless these teams can figure out a way to bully out Xayah Rakan, maybe a vertical jungle strategy, using either Ivern or J4, super aggressive and get into the lanes to draw some effects. But yeah, that's the meta snapshot. Let me know what you think. All right, let's get into patch notes. So 1320 was pretty well received, and I like the changes. I hate the timing. I wish that they would let us play on a patch with the worlds, and this should have been the timing for 1320. But it is what it is. We're going to have big changes. A lot of people have been talking about Hullbreaker, so that is getting a big adjustment. And some of the champions, Briar finally getting nerfed so that we can take it off our permaban list. Jinx, also some important adjustments. Basically, if you won any late game team fight with Jinx, you're going to win the game. So let's take a peek at what's going on. The return of Nexus Blitz. I know Landon's going to be a huge fan of this. He plays on the PBE to play Nexus Blitz. And then he was like, wait, it's gone. I was like, you know what, Landon? That probably means it's coming to live. So he'll be excited to hear this. A lot of people say this is the best alternate game mode that they've come out with. Champion balance buff percent adjustments have been reset for all champions. That's for all of Nexus Blitz. And then there's jungle pet. You all get jungle pets because they're fun. Excuse me. This is all for Nexus Blitz. Okay. So if you like Nexus Blitz, you can take a poke at all of these, but those are all specific. I am glad, because I was looking at these and thinking that these were all about live changes. I was like, oh my goodness, it's going to be so hard to get through everything. But yeah, I think this is all because everyone's getting jungle pets. They just want everyone to be healthier. This is not part of the main game. So let's get to the meat and potatoes. What's going to be live? Aurelion Sol was the big winner of the patch. Basically, the games were going longer. That favors the champion who has the ultimate endgame. So they're taking some power out of Breath of Light. If you still want to be the endgame scaler, if your whole team is early game, especially if you have something like Elise in jungle, you can roam with them, you can make plays, they can get you ahead, and then you can go and try to get to that end game. Aurelion Sol is still going to be great. Bel'Veth got the biggest, fattest nerf because everything about her got nerfed. She got worse, Rift Herald got worse, the prize for Rift Herald got worse, taking plates got worse, games are going longer, so you don't have as much snowball potential. That said, she can still fill the role of being the champion that you take if you want to snowball early heralds, especially if you think that they are going to go after dragons. You might be uncontested. If you can get that Remora passive and use it to break waves, especially with Ziggs, Ziggs being another one of the big winners from last patch. We talk about how that range really doubled in range. It wasn't a buff of 30, it was really a buff of 60 for its splash radius to be able to hit people, at least in waves. But if they have Ziggs, be Bel'Veth, go to the Ziggs lanes, push, rinse, repeat, do it over and over again as much as you can. Brand, next step, and it seems like they're taking all of these mage supports and trying to help them out for laning and doing other things. You're going to see changes to monster damage. The brand changes are all geared at helping them be better at clearing jungle camps, which is something that mid laners want to do. You can also bring it into the jungle. It's kind of awkward. You're really dated on your play pattern when you're playing brand. You need to hit that stun to be a reasonable jungler. So in that case, that means if you're going to do it, it's got to be an early Sork Shoes into early Rylai's. And if you're going to go jungle, that's what you have. I think you have to go that, and then you can go for the rest of the damage going from there. You see the passive changes going up. Maximum monster damage per tick is unchanged. Conflagration, however, is getting a little bit of a tweak here. Losing 5 damage means it's a little bit worse for the laning phase. This is your best poking tool. A lot of people try to use the W, but the E is really, really good, and especially when you put all your points into E as lane brand, you can W the front line, E to kill everybody by hitting the W on the cannon and the melees, then you E the cannon between a dematerializer, boom, that basically wipes the entire wave if you have one stack on the melees and on the casters already. So you guys can try that out. It still has all the weaknesses of a mid lane mage like this that is very low playmaking. They're trying to help out the Zyras and the Brands and the Vel'Kozes of the world, but, you know, people play them support because that's where they're better. Briar, getting some changes to her growth because she has such great endgame scaling, meaning that if she got ahead, and especially if you bought Hullbreaker and went to a side lane, she became very, very difficult to answer. And also, if she just got ahead in general 202, then she's going to be able to stat check people and move up. So she's losing 0.3% there. The heal if bleeding target dies is going up, which is very nice. That's going to help her in her jungle. This is because the jungle camps got a little bit harder. So your first clear was a little bit painful, and you could exploit Briar in those situations, especially if you caught her mid frenzy, because she'd come off the camp, she'd start hitting you, the camp would hit her, you would hit her, everything would be good about that situation. And snack attack, The recast bonus physical damage, all right, is getting a slight change. We are getting under here 10%, 3.5 per bonus 100 of target missing health. This was another one of her sources of bonus AD scaling. It's a very small thing. It's only going down by 0.5%, but it is 100 of your 100 AD. So let's say you've got 200 on 3 items, then you're going to feel this by 1%, but it's a small thing. These are small nerfs just to kind of say, hey, look, we're nerfing Briar. She's still going to be strong enough. She's fine. You can play her for sure and be confident that you're on with it. Caitlyn. This change, I think, is going to propel her near the top of the ranks, especially with Infinity Edge being as strong as it is. You're getting extra damage on your headshots and based on your crit chance. So now you can even go Infinity Edge into Cloak, which is something that you used to do on Neela, where you just spammed cloaks, or even Gangplank. You spammed the cloaks. You should be able to get some good effects by going that. Ace in the Hole, the cooldown is going up to 90 at all ranks, so that is a huge nerf. The physical damage, this is based on the lethality of the champion. The base damage is going down, and the bonus attack damage ratio is going down. And your bonus damage from critical strike chance is actually going up significantly. So they're basically forcing you into the crit build. If you still want to build lethality, you can do it. You can go Umbral Glaive Collector into Infinity Edge, kind of mark all of your or check all your boxes that way. You could even go Yumu's, but I think Infinity Edge is going to be important enough because these things counting as crits means you're going to get that amplified damage. So you definitely want to consider it. And then, as always, you go Rapid Fire Cannon afterwards. That in the end game you can get the maximum amount. Just make sure that you are prepping your headshot on the wave and then walk up with Rapid Fire Cannon and get your first shot on somebody's face, hopefully chunking them for 30-40%. Dr. Mundo was another big winner with the changes, so he's getting a knockdown. The maximum health at full ranks on E, which is what you should be maxing on this champion, is going down by 1, which is pretty massive, considering it's the best trading tool that you have. Bonus attack damage based on missing health is also going down significantly. So this champion is less going to have his windows to just brawl his way out of fights. Heartsteel into Titanic Hydra and Gargoyle Stoneplate is the best way to build a Mundo. Hecarim, attack damage growth going up. The duration of Spirit of Dread going up. So they're walking back some of the things that were nerfed for him. This instantly puts Hecarim up near the top. This is to make up for the Gustwalker nerf. But if you haven't seen it, building Yumu's is exceptionally strong on this champion. It amplifies extra damage. It moves forward. You're building up the stacks all game anyways. So what you want to do is start with all longswords, get your Serrated Dirk at least. Then you can build up a tier. And then you can finish up Yumu's Ghostblade, finish Mirror Mana, and then go from there with your appropriate itemization for the game. Jinx no longer can stack. She can renew her Get Excited off of structures, but she can't stack. She's also being maxed at 5 because 5 is the number of enemy champions. So 5 is the new max for this. This does mean that you're going to get rid of some of those YouTube short worthy moments where you had the rocket launcher out at the end of the game versus the Nexus pew 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 pew, like literally attacking that quickly because she had 7 stacks. It was an ace plus a turret kill, an inhibitor kill, 2 more turret kills, and she was just like rampaging through. So you're not going to get those big get excited moments, which is kind of too bad. It made the game kind of exciting at the end, but it did feel bad that you're like, wait, this champion can end from here, no one else can. Maybe Ziggs. She was certainly on the tier of Ziggs, maybe even better. Blast Patch probably was better than Ziggs, but Ziggs can be the Demolitionist once again. Cassante, they're happy with where he landed, except they want him to be stronger. All out bonus damage is getting a big buff, all right? So a ton of power in this ability. The required health for the minimum cast time on your Q, you only need 1200 bonus health now, so that's actually very easy to achieve. You can usually get this on 1.5 items. So you can be, and especially if you go something like Warmogs, although you don't always need to go. But this makes it super easy to get to this endgame scaling where you feel like you can Q and reset. They're also changing his the Q and E attack reset ratios when you're in all out. down to instantaneous. So basically, auto queue is just instant, and then it can be auto queue auto. All right, so you should do that in every single game. Now, the one big thing that they did here, the channel time is now 1.5 seconds. That is an eternity. All right, we're starting to talk about like Carthage Ultimate almost. This ability was so powerful that you should have been doing everything around, do I have my W? I win fight, right? That is how Cassante worked. And I think that he was that strong. They are preemptively taking away power from this by adding half second to the channel. Don't get surprised by it. It's going to feel really bad, especially since people can just move now. And you can't reposition this. You can't do any of the tricks that you used to be able to do. So this ability feels awful. You're going to want to set this up with someone from the jungle that has a big root or stun, some way to help set you up to play W into Q3. A couple bug fixes. This was going into the changes. This is expected. I'm glad that they're being proactive. LeBlanc was one of the big losers from the anti-snowballing patch, right? The idea that they want games to go longer. And also, they're still trying to rebuild her from all of the static Shiv metas that warped around this champion. So she's getting 10% extra AP on her distortion and an extra 10% AP on the second half of her ethereal chains. This is fairly significant. In the early game, we're talking about an extra 20 damage off of the combos when you're jumping in, because you are jumping on top of them to land your E. So when you distort on top, ethereal chains hits, you're getting an extra 20 damage. Later in the game, it's going to be even. So this is a very big, feels nice moment. I think LeBlanc is going to be the snowballer of choice. Master Yi, they said, took a downturn in the jungle. Basically, was taking too much damage in the early jungle and wasn't able to jump up ahead. I saw Master Yi actually dealing more damage in the jungle relative, so I'm surprised about this. So this is just going to be a straight buff for this champion. The longer games go, the better it is to play Master Yi. Just be cognizant that you probably don't want to play it in the first 2 picks of the draft, because there's going to be too much lockdown. But once you see that your enemy team is playing champions like Katarina, or control mages, even Oriana, that you can jump on pretty effectively, then you're going to want to play Master Yi, and he will be one of the premium endgame scalers. Morgana, they're helping out a little bit. They're giving 1 damage per tick per rank to her W. This is going to be the difference between killing the caster line in 3 levels of the W versus 4 levels. So this is going to affect mid lane Morgana. She's also getting an extra 5% damage in the jungle, because a lot of people have been playing this champion. I highly recommend taking it. Start Raptors, okay? From Raptors, you can either do Red Krugs or Krugs Red, depending on whether or not you think you might end up ganking in the top lane. Or you can go take Blue Gromp and then circle back around, and then your clear is actually fast enough that you'll still be fighting for the Scuttle Crab, and then you can come back and take your second clear of the Raptors. This is the fastest way to get a fast 6 on Morgana, and it opens up a lot of options when it comes to gank paths later in the game. Rammus was a big winner from the patch. Games were going longer. It means that he was going way harder. Also, the fact that they were getting extra damage from the clear meant that Rammus needed to get a little bit of a peg down. This makes a lot of sense. He's losing 20 damage early and then getting 5 back per level in his Q. As a laner, this is permanently bad. As a jungler, this tends to be the second spell that you max, because you want the extra move speed. You want to be able to fly around fights. You want to be able to create multiple different fights. So you will get this back, but you are going to feel this for sure in the early game. And the defensive ball curl, the bonus armor, is going down by 5 and 5% of a ratio. So this was a tremendous nerf. You're still only going to want to put the 1 point in as a jungler. Occasionally, especially if you think there's going to be a jungle invade, someone that's trying to fight you, then you can put more points in, since it's your biggest source of damage. But as always, you need to make sure that you have points in the E to actually make people attack you. Because if they have tenacity, they can actually cancel their own attack before they actually hit you if you only put 1 rank in. So you want to make sure to have points still. Seraphine, massive changes, and I want to take note of one thing that they said. The small but dedicated, or well, not the word. Basically, they said players want to play her in the bot lane, So we're going to make changes to help her as a bot laner and specifically as a support, since that's where people want to play her. That's what they said. This doesn't take into account that players actually adapt to champions like Zyra, Brand, Vel'Koz, Xerath. These are all designed mid laners, but you can't play them mid because you get annihilated by assassins, and other control mages are much safer to play. They have more agency in the fights. Now, Seraphine, I do think, was completely viable in mid. She was obviously best in bot lane as a carry. But they're saying, no, this is where people want to play her. They want to play her as support. Maybe there is some of that, especially at the lowest ranks, where you have people that are just like, oh, I just want to play Seraphine. It's fun. I want to play the sing-song, teenage pop star, and just, that's me. So I'm going to play that. And maybe, power to you if that's you. I appreciate them playing towards a player base that wants that, but like, the player base as a whole will always decide where things go based on how good it is, right? Like if it's good, it'll get played there. That's what's causing it to go down to the bot lane. That's what's making it a bot lane carry, and specifically paired with something like Sona just gives your team oppressive amounts of scaling. Why can't we lean into that? Like, why can't we take, instead of the design of the champion and then forcing it on people, or leaning into like what one subset of players does? I get it though. As far as the health of the game long term, if you think that that's where you're getting your teeny bop players, your e-girl wannabes that want to play this sort of champion in the bot lane, and they want to play it as support, and those players tend to be supports, then lean in, make them happier playing this champion. I'm sure it'll sell more skins. Anyways, all of these changes are geared at making her more regen reliant, which is where the itemization for supports leans in, because they have better things like the Fairy Charm itemizations are better than the Amp Tome itemizations. So base mana regen goes up. This means that when you buy amplifiers, that it will amplify this number and it will be better. Your mana regeneration growth is going down. So this is bad for people who are hitting levels higher, right? So 3.5. So we're talking about level 9 is where you're going to start feeling worse as far as your regen. Base mana going down by 80, mana growth going up by 10. So again, this will be the opposite. It'll feel worse in lane and force you to lean into regen. Base armor going way up. This is actually a big buff for the laner. Less likely that they can just kill you. Health growth going down. Attack speed growth going up, which is kind of interesting. I think they said this was as a note to mid laners who need to be able to push down a turret if they're left alone in that lane, which is a mid lane phenomenon. Q high note, the cooldown going down by 1 early. That's fantastic. This does help with poke patterns of support. This helps all ranks. The damage, however, sorry, I shouldn't say however. The damage going up in base values by a lot, but losing its scaling. Okay, so it used to have a scaling. This is one of the few abilities in the game that had incremental scaling changes, which I hate. I don't like that they do it. It puts unnecessary complexity into the champion. So you see that they're catering towards a certain target group when they make it simpler like this. Overall, this is a huge nerf for the scaling, because that 40 damage, when you talk about having 300 AP, that's the threshold now. It's going to feel like more, except in those end game carry situations, it'll now be less, especially you're talking about double casting the spell. It hits twice, so you're absolutely going to feel it post Rabadons. Mana cost is going up, and this is significant. 80 mana makes this a feels bad ability to cast. It is a tremendously high mana cost. The cooldown is getting better over ranks. You should absolutely be maxing this second. There is a world where you actually max this first now, especially if they're truly leaning into this. They've made the Q better at rank 1, and it's worse at the final rank relative. You do get a little bit more damage, but that's not worth the difference in the shield. The problem is that you don't necessarily want to be spamming this. You also need to cast your other spells to have an empowered version of W, unless you have something like Overheal, Shield Bash, Barrier, another enchanter in your lane, things like this to give you the shield, which is definitely a viable strategy on this champion. The shield itself is going up. The scaling is unwavering. The missing health heal is going down by 2%. and losing its ratio. This is massive. All right, this is a massive change. This probably just completely cuts off Seraphine. I bet your Seraphine players who want to play Seraphine just to play Seraphine are gonna not notice and not care. But this is a very meaningful change for anyone trying to build this as a composition. Mana cost on the E is going down, much easier to cast this spell. And they're getting points in the ranks, which is interesting. But again, this is sort of a nod. Your support players tended to play more of this ability, but E doesn't have cooldown reduction the way that W and Q do. So you absolutely want to have those other abilities to spam, but Q as a support feels really bad. You just want the one rank anyways, just to basically turn on your other abilities to empower them. So it will be interesting. Seraphine's going to be in a completely new place. My snap judgment is that this is probably going to make her very weak relative, especially the people who are playing this champion not seeing it, especially this. Like, starting mana down by 80 is so significant. That is going to be 2 less Qs that you get off during the laning phase. Especially as a bot lane carry, you relied on that as a poke pattern and push pattern, and you couldn't really do much. You can't get your empowered auto attacks out that, so this is a huge nerf. So we'll see where she ends up landing. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to move her around. It's a big bummer for me because I was a huge Seraphine Sona player, and this is a bad day for me. Tahm Kench. The frog is clogged, thus we need to uninhibit the ribbit, unload the toad, unbench the Kench. They say that they want to buff him, and yet what they buff is the like weirdest, most awkward part of his kit, which is landing this W that had an almost impossible hit. You basically needed up to 2 forms, depending on what it was, forms of CC to hold someone in place for you to actually be able to land this spell. If you do, now it gets reduced by a little bit more as you rank it up, which is just a bizarre like place to buff it. But the bonus magic damage here from an acquired taste, right? So check out all these elements. 8 to 60, it had AP, 2% AP per 100 bonus health, and 3% bonus health. Okay. So you actually had an extra AP ratio based on how much bonus health you were. So if you had bonus health and AP, like Demonic Embrace, then you actually had more ratios. Very complex, right? So they take away 2 early, 12 late. You still get the bonus health, but now it's 5% of your bonus health raw going into this. So if you're stacking health, for example, Heartsteel, this acquired taste is going to start dealing more damage. But in the very beginning of the game, this is what I think they want to get rid of. They say we don't want to stat check top laners. So it's going to be largely in his scaling. This is fantastic for bot lane Tahm Kench to play with Senna. This is just a huge buff for that. Top lane, it's still awkward because the value of the shield or the E is so much attached to having a champion nearby that it may still have big deficiencies up in the top lane. I get why they're trying to change the things that they're trying to change. I still love the Abyssal Mask, Demonic Embrace build on this champion. You don't need to go Nashor's Tooth. It's a little bit too weird. You can go Hail of Blades if you want your extra attack speed, but generally, Guardian and Grasp are going to be great. Guardian if you're playing into double range in the bot lane, Grasp if there's a melee there. And I think this is a fun champion. I enjoy playing it. I think it's a fun play style to play with Senna as a support carry, so I approve of changes. Varus got hit by the anti-snowballing changes, so he gets a little bit of a tweak. 1 extra damage per rank in the Blighted Quiver, which is just teensy tiny, and 5% slow added to Hail of Arrows. This is his biggest laning tool. You absolutely want to have points in this ability. Sometimes it's just 3, so you can use it for poking in lane. Then your Q becomes the bigger part of your kit as you finish your mana. So definitely use E for the laning phase. First ability, definitely E. Then you can put like 2 or 3 points into it to help yourself win the lane, and then you Zyra, another one of those champions that was designed as a mid laner, moved over, and then they're trying to address as a potential mid laner. So this is where they mentioned the mid lane phenomenon, where you might be left alone in your lane and you're pushing. She gets extra attack speed. This is going to affect all of her scaling. So it's a tiny bit right here. 0.06 is a 16th of a second. But every time that you level up and your attack speed ratio moves up, it's addressing that extra 0.06, so it will start going up. I don't think you're going to be building Nashor's Tooth on her, unless somehow we magically find out that the plants have always been scaling on the attack speed and it's just been this hidden thing, then that would be fantastic. I would actually love nothing more than that being the case. And if they got the on hits from the Gnasher's Tooth, my dick. Anyways, it would be overpowered. I hope that's not that case. Passive Garden of Thorns, 20 to 100 with 15% AP. It's getting a 3% AP ratio with a little bit of base damage nerf. This won't affect your lane phase. It actually is a slight help because you've got that early buff from AP. She's more a champion that likes pen more than AP in general, but this will be an interesting nod in that direction. Magic damage is going up by 5% on her Q, which is what laning Zyra would want to play most. And E, Grasping Roots, is what you would generally max if you're a support. So it's actually losing damage, gaining ratio. Okay. So at about 400 AP is where you're going to have break even on this. So this is post Rabadons is when you're going to be bigger on the Grasping Roots. This is interesting. I like this. It also is going to affect her jungle. She is a viable AP carry from the jungle, and it looks like they're moving a lot of champions in that direction. That said, all of these champions that deal more to monsters, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where you should play them. It's also a buff to lane when you deal more to jungle camps, because you can push a lane, it's gone, jungler's on the other side of the map, you can go help reset their Raptor camp, for example. Especially like this is very common on Anivias of the world, but Zyra can one-shot any or I should say one rotation any camp. So this any amount of buffs to her damage and AP ratios is going to make her more viable as a laner. I'm certainly going to try to have some fun playing this champion. Rylai's is exceptionally good. The burn is exceptionally good. You tend to want to go Liandry's because you're constantly dealing that poke damage, and that's more impactful for that to work with Liandry's than it is with Luden's. But then Shadow Flame and Rylai's are both very viable options. And then you have to go something like Zhonya's to keep yourself alive in fights. Enchanter proc damage changes. Okay, I'm just going to read this one out because it's fairly substantial. We're looking into enchanters to bring enchanters into parity after the recent Milio passive changes to let their proc damage sources count as their damage, but attribute kills to their buffed ally. This means that a select number of items and runes will proc off the enchanter's damage enchantments from now on. Proc damage now also provides an additional Spell Thief's proc on hit. This is actually huge. Paired with this is a change to the Summon Airy major rune to prevent Airy from kill stealing when procced through an ally. All right, so they're gonna have to make a couple changes, but they're basically hitting all of these. Sona Q empowering it. Yumi Q. Wait, Prowling Projectile? It's gonna count for the person you're on? What? Okay, sure. Leverage makes a lot of sense. Tidecaller's Blessing makes sense. So all of these tools, your basically quality of life is going up, counting as your damage, but going towards their things, so you can feel a little bit better about how you performed in. Hullbreaker, the big bad nasty. Bonus armor going down as the game scales up. Bonus armor and magic resistance, half of that. All right, they're basically addressing that Hullbreaker has become a problem. I don't think so much that it's overpowered, so much that when someone on your team gets Hullbreaker, you end up with this like kind of nasty dichotomy. People who want to group, people who obviously don't want to group, spamming Hullbreaker, don't get near me. How come you're not carrying in the lane? I feel like this just creates a polarized game in general, and I think that it's probably bad for the game. That said, I still love it as an item. If you're playing a split push, Hullbreaker is the best item for the game. I also love it on champions that have a dive, because the Hullbreaker buff has an in combat timer, and so you get 4 seconds in combat with the buff. So one thing that I love doing, and it can be kind of niche, but what I love using this for is the Yoriks, the Shens, the Briars, that someone that might join a fight, right? Pantheon especially, actually. Pantheon and Briar being my two favorites for it, where you are actually now stronger than the enemy split pusher, and you have an ultimate that can help you join the fight. And when you join the fight is when you start losing that buff, but you get 4 seconds in that fight, which is an eternity, all right? Like, that's a long time to be in a fight and still have the resistances. So as long as that's still happening, then you absolutely want to buy this item on champions like that, put pressure in multiple different lanes. First Strike getting nerfed again. They're saying that First Strike, basically the bonus damage needs to go down. This is because it's a scaling rune in general. They have not, however, hit Dark Harvest. Dark Harvest is another endgame scaling rune, and with games going longer, I highly recommend that if Dark Harvest was in your repertoire already for a champion, go Dark Harvest, because it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the games are going to give you more opportunity to pop it off. Bonus move speed is going down on Phase Rush. It's basically too good at what it does, so they want to nerf this mostly for pro play and the highest level. Jungle sustain adjustments, they're making it a little bit healthier, rewarding to get your jungle, because after the jungle got harder to kill, it meant that people were coming out lower and it felt a little bit riskier. And basically, it's a really bad time to be jungle in general, because they buffed Doran's items, they buffed laners, they nerfed the jungle, they nerfed the jungle rewards. Everything about the jungle is much more difficult than it was. Jungle diff can be that much more important. So that's something to keep in mind, whether or not you want to go and fight them and out jungle them, outpath them. Because champions are so weak coming out of the jungle now, it was basically correct. Anytime they were ganking, it was best to just go take their camps and to leave. So we'll see whether or not that still becomes part of the strategy. ARAM we don't care about. Worlds Clash, if you guys want to clash, you guys can try to get a team together, and go to gigagamingacademy.com/coaching and just come by, mention that you have a team and you want to get together, and I'll help you out. Mythic Shop is rotating. Some bug fixes, take a peek for your favorite champions. They're changing the AFK surrender at early game. If someone is early game AFK, from 100% to 70%, so you only need 3 out of the 4 people. And then a couple other changes to whether or not you're pre-mades or a couple of VFXs. I wonder if they hit, what was the one that happened at Worlds? Volibear. Adam canceled his auto and his W because the sound effects go off before the effect goes off, and that should never happen. The audio effect should be something that confirms. That is not addressed here. And then Cafe Cuties and the much maligned Coven Syndra. So they did end up giving Coven Syndra. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not she would show up. And then when she did, they're just like, what is this? It feels like it's not really that much of a coven, which I think is where the issue was. She was already this dark witch, and so people were like, wait, how come we're not getting a coven skin for Syndra? It's because it was very difficult to conceptually make it different. Maybe they could have leaned in to Fright Night style things. But anyways, it is October 25th, so I don't know that we're going to get Fright Night style skins. It looks like we're just getting the opposite side, the Cafe Cuties side of the scope. And here's a peek at the chromas. But anyways, that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, thank you so much for appreciating the channel. I love that you guys come by and catch your meta scoops with us. So make sure that you like and subscribe, hang out for more, and we'll be back tomorrow to continue with Worlds Breakdown. We're going to be continuing, I believe it's the 2-in-1 bracket that is going to be playing for promotion. So we've got all those 3 games ahead of us. All right. So I'll catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Keep it chill. Peace.